Welcome to The Art She Manages, the podcast celebrating remarkable women in the arts and cultural management sector. I'm Alma, your host. Today, I'm speaking with a guest who perfectly embodies the future of classical music leadership. Rose Hunt is the CEO of the Kammerphilharmonie Frankfurt and is very active in the German independent art scene. You're about to hear a very honest conversation about the challenges of the arts and cultural sector. And Rose, despite her young age, isn't afraid to tackle these hurdles and is quickly making her mark and rising through the cultural world. Welcome to the show, Rose. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. Well, let's start. So you were born in the UK, then moved to Ireland, and later moved to Italy, right?
Yes, exactly. I was born in London and lived there for the first 3 years of my life. And we then moved to Ireland when I was 3, and lived in County Clare, so kind of Republic of Ireland, for 3 or 4 years. And my parents always moved around a lot. So when we were, after 4 years, when I was 7, they then decided to move to Italy. And we landed in Trentino, that's a region right up in the north of Italy in the Alps. So it's kind of Italy, but at the same time, not that far from the Austrian border. And that's where I grew up.
That's great. So many countries really at that early age. How did that affect your artistic development, and how did your musical journey begin?
Good question. I started playing the flute when I was 9, so I started playing the flute in Italy. But I always loved music, so even when I was really small, I can't remember a time where music wasn't a huge passion of mine. I don't come from a family of musicians. So my father is English, mother Irish, and my grandfather was Welsh.
Wow.
And he came, again, he wasn't a musician, but he loved music. And I think he was maybe a kind of repressed musician. I think if he could have gone back and kind of decided freely what to do, he would have done music. And I remember when we used to go and visit them in Wales when we were small, they had a piano in the corridor in their house. And I remember kind of sitting there at the piano. I could hardly kind of reach up to the keys, and him showing me how to play scales and things. And my 2 sisters ended up kind of doing music too, or studying music up to a certain point, and my 2 cousins on my father's side too. So even though we don't come from a family of musicians, it's somehow in the family now. And I think that is probably thanks to our grandfather. And in Italy, I'm not quite sure why I started music, but my parents brought me to a music school, and for a year there was a course for children in which you could try out different kinds of instruments, and not all instruments, but I think we tried out 8 or 10 instruments, and I couldn't make up my mind between flute and harp. And then I chose flute. That was probably quite a good practical decision.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
But you transitioned quite fast from being a trained flutist to into cultural management. And from my observations, this is a path that many take later in life after having previous and different careers. Was there a moment or influence that helped you decide on that path early on?
I started playing flute when I was 9 and entered the Conservatoire, so the music high school in Italy in Trento, when I was 13. And so when I finished school, when I finished the music high school or secondary school, I didn't really stop to think. I just carried on with my flute studies and moved to Bologna and carried on there. But I think for many people, when you finish school, that's a kind of important moment to sit down, think about your plans, think about about what you want to do. And I didn't do that because I wanted to carry on with my flute studies, to finish what I'd started. And And in some ways, I think that was great. But at the same time, I then realized, so while, because I did my bachelor in Bologna, and towards the end of my studies in Bologna, I started really thinking about what I wanted to do and in what direction I wanted to go. And I think at that point I realized that however much I love music, flute wasn't the thing for me, or kind of performing, for various reasons. In some ways it was a very pragmatic decision. So I didn't feel like the whole kind of process of auditions and the incredibly kind of competitive and often quite, not nasty is a strong word, but it can be a very, very kind of competitive environment. And that, took away the fun for me in some ways. And when I realized that it was starting to become a job and wasn't just a passion and something I was doing during school and something that I loved doing, in some ways I just realized that I wanted to go in another direction and couldn't make my mind up between music therapy and music management.
Interesting.
And in the end decided to go for music management.
And then you moved to Germany, right?
Yeah, and then I moved to Germany, exactly.
So was it a strategic move to pursue your career, your studies, or did you want to explore some different country?
There were various reasons. So when I finished my studies in Bologna and was trying to decide whether to do music therapy or music management, I looked around for various possible schools and masters. And if I had decided to do music therapy, I think I could have stayed in Italy. There are quite a few good music therapy schools in Italy, but it's nearly impossible to study theatre management and music management in Italy. There are a few options, but I didn't find any of the options particularly attractive. And so I didn't really have that much of a choice. And at the same time, it was a private decision too, because my boyfriend is a double bass player and he'd been thinking about moving up to Germany to study here too. So it was partly because I didn't really have any choices in Italy, and partly because we just knew how good the level was here in Germany and how many opportunities there are here in Germany.
Were you already fluent in German?
No, not at all.
How did it go?
It was shock therapy. I studied a little bit of German, or did a little bit of German at school, but at elementary school, and then picked it up again when I was in Bologna, but only had a B1 when I moved to Germany. For the first year, I lived in Berlin and started working a little bit there and really concentrated on my German. So I did kind of German courses, and I needed a C1 for the master program here in Germany. So I had to kind of, really concentrate on the language for the first year or so.
You mentioned that you were already working in Berlin.
Yeah, exactly. I started working a bit in the independent scene in Berlin. In particular for the Kammerorchestra unter den Linden, a chamber orchestra in Berlin. And they mainly do concerts for children, but not only, and work with various schools in Berlin. Yeah, they also have a kind of program that they do in the Kammermusiksaal in the Berlin Philharmonie. And I think the good thing in general about working for ensembles in the independent scene is that the team's often very, very small. So you have to do all sorts that can be stressful, but at the same time it means that you end up kind of learning a bit, in all sorts of directions, kind of various topics. And so it was really good. It was really good practice before doing my master's.
But was it challenging to land those jobs without, a master degree?
It wasn't actually. It was mainly luck, because I moved to Germany and didn't really know anyone at first, or I'd never kind of spent any time in Germany. So I did have kind of one connection, family friends, so friends of my parents who live in Berlin. yeah, they were a huge help in the first kind of weeks and months when I moved up to Berlin. And they're very well connected. And they know the director of this chamber orchestra, Andreas Pakela, and put me in touch with him. And I mean, I have to say, I'm really, really grateful because my German was so bad at the beginning. And he was just incredibly supportive and I think kind of appreciated the work I did, but at the same time was very, yeah, patient and supportive. And that really gave me a great chance to learn a lot.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing, really. So you mentioned that there were so many possibilities in Germany and you experienced both the Italian and the German cultural sectors. But what are the most striking differences you have observed, like apart from the fact that there are more opportunities? What are the other differences?
I think the biggest difference is the public funding. So the fact that the art scene, music scene, and in general culture in Italy really isn't funded that much at all. And it sounds like a paradox because, I mean, Italy in some ways is considered opera, music, so many kind of forms of art started in Italy, were born there, developed there, and yet somehow on the political level, maybe social level too, this isn't really appreciated. And and money, I mean, to put it simply, money is a huge problem in Italy. And nevertheless, the creative field, the music field in Italy is incredibly dynamic and flexible, and it's all sorts of kind of incredible ensembles and people, even though the circumstances are so tough and so difficult. But I think that is the main difference compared to Germany, because things are changing quickly here too now with the huge cuts in Köln and in Berlin. So it's not in any way ideal here, and it could go downhill in the next, or probably will go downhill in the next years. But still, compared to Italy, it is just incredibly well funded and appreciated. So culture and music in general here.
I can only imagine, yes. So your master's program in Frankfurt, right? That was theater and orchestra management. It's very specialized. So you immediately decided upon working with orchestras?
Yes. So, I mean, I have a music background and did want to stay in that field. And I applied for various master programs in Germany. And some of the ones that I applied for were cultural management in general, so not specifically theatre and orchestra management like the master's program in Frankfurt. But I'm really happy I got in Frankfurt because that was my kind of number one choice and definitely the direction I wanted to go in. And in some ways, I think if you do a master's program or any kind of studies that are specialised, it helps you then when you start working, because the skills that you learn, aren't too vague in general, but they really kind of prepare you for the day-to-day work life.
Right, that leads me to my next question. So which skills or learnings from your studies have proven the most essential in your current role and job?
Good question. I think because we often talk about kind of hard facts and all the things you learn, and we definitely did kind of learn hard facts too, but looking back, I think the skills that I've really used a lot since finishing my studies have been others, so kind of soft skills like...
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so kind of communication and empathy, and we talked a lot about kind of emotional intelligence during our studies, and of course they're not necessarily skills that you can learn in a few years while studying, but I think they're often skills that we're either not that aware of or that we haven't in any way kind of structured. And if you do in some way, if you become more aware of them and kind of know how to deal with certain situations and kind of think about the psychology behind various situations in our field, and make sure you never forget how important empathy and emotional intelligence is. I think that really stuck, and that's I'm really grateful for that part of my studies in particular.
And what about the hard skills?
The hard skills are definitely incredibly important too. Everything from law to kind of business administration and marketing and fundraising and controlling, all things you definitely need. And of course, it's also kind of learn by doing, and that plays an important role too. But I think once you start working, if you have been prepared in a certain way, then yeah, the whole process of learning by doing becomes that much easier.
Okay, my next question is quite provocative, so let me know if you want to answer. So if you could go back and redesign one part of your education to better reflect the realities of the job, what would it be?
My education in general, or the master's program in Frankfurt in particular?
Well, probably the master's program, because this is very tied to your current job.
Mm-hmm. I think if I could go back, I would definitely wait another year, because my German, I mean, it was good enough and it worked out in the end, and the professors and the whole team were very supportive. But I think it would have been that much kind of, I might have learned even more if I had kind of improved my German for another year before starting. So I did kind of jump in at the deep end and maybe should have waited a bit longer. And apart from that, we did kind of business administration and accounting, and I really liked the professor. But at the same time, especially in the last year, I have had the feeling that I wasn't that prepared when it comes to kind of business administration and the whole financial side of things. And I think that's, yeah, for various reasons. Because of my background, I mean, I went to music secondary school and then studied flute, and so in no way was I prepared in that sense. I'd never done economics before, I'd never done law before, I'd never done business administration before, so it was all very new for me. But at the same time, I think it would have been good during our studies to have, maybe work on a few more practical examples and or to learn to apply what we were doing to very kind of concrete situations. I think that would have been useful. And yeah, I've had to kind of learn quite a lot by myself in the last year. That's fine. But there's just kind of
learning by doing. You entered the industry quite quickly. Can you walk us through your first job after graduating? What your responsibilities were and what challenges stood out? I can imagine everything that you have just listed, right? Accounting, budgeting.
Yeah, so I applied for various jobs while, so kind of during my studies, during the second year of my master's program, and started straight away actually, so straight after my studies. So I finished writing my dissertation in kind of August, September, and in September started working at the theatre in Osnabrück as assistant to the orchestra manager there. Yes, in a lot of ways it was challenging for various reasons, because it was my first kind of full-time job after my studies, and it was kind of during the COVID period, during the pandemic, and things had got a little bit better by then, but the first year was marked by the pandemic, and there was still all sorts of, we were still limited in lots of ways and had to organise tests for the musicians regularly, and I think that made it kind of particularly challenging at first. And of course it was kind of new environment, new colleagues. We talked a lot about state-funded theatres during our studies, but one thing is to kind of talk about them and read about them, and one thing is to actually kind of be there, be part of one, and to kind of work out the dynamics and the structure, and so in that sense it was challenging, but fun too, and I did learn a lot, and I think I was very lucky when it came to the team, or kind of in particular the orchestra manager. We got on very well. He was incredibly supportive, and so even though the workload was very big, and in particular during the first year, the pandemic was still was still kind of very present. Nevertheless, he always managed to kind of create a good environment in the team, and I think that made a huge difference, because I think especially in the kind of first period, getting to know the orchestra, and there are just so many people that you work with, because it's not only a small team, but all the various departments, and then you have a huge orchestra with kind of 60 to 70 musicians. That, I mean, isn't a huge orchestra compared to other orchestras, but still just the load of the kind of size of the team and the number of the people that you have that you work with on a daily basis is huge, and that takes getting used to. But all in all, I think I was really lucky.
That's great to hear. You mentioned in the private conversation that your master thesis, your master dissertation was on leadership. And that leads to my question. What was your biggest wake-up call when it came to understanding how leadership actually works inside a cultural institution?
Yes, exactly. I wrote about leadership and various leadership models. I don't think I had a particular wake-up call. It was more a kind of series of wake-up calls or a process maybe. And during my studies, I read various books by Thomas Schmidt, the professor, so our main professor in Frankfurt. And he wrote one book in particular, so Macht und Struktur im Theater, Power and Structure in Theatres. And it's a very kind of in-depth analysis about power dynamics in theatres and the kind of often quite old-fashioned structures in theatres. And he also talks in detail about abuse of power, so everything from sexual abuse to psychological abuse to all sorts of kind of phenomena that are still unfortunately part of the theatre world. Of course, that sounds very kind of negative, but it is important to look at these things too. And that was definitely an important moment for me. So I wasn't naive when I started working. We were well prepared in that sense. And I have to say I was kind of positively surprised after, well, I suppose lucky in a lot of ways when I actually started working. Another thought process that I had, especially during the first year in Osnabrück, was comparing previous experiences in the independent scene to what I then kind of saw and observed in Osnabrück. And I did an internship with the Stegreif Orchestra in Berlin, so an amazing ensemble in the independent scene in Berlin. And I did tour management for them and various other things for 2 months during my studies. And during these 2 months, they organized a workshop, and the main topic was leadership and collective decision-making, so kind of consensus-based decision-making. And it was incredibly interesting, but I also realized how complex this process is, and if you really want everyone to kind of participate and be part of the decision making, you need to invest a lot of time and energy into it. And whereas in big state-funded theatres, it's often very different, so very kind of structured and hierarchic, and with positive and negative sides in both situations. And I think for kind of decision making, or in particular if you need to kind of make decisions quickly, a very kind of clear structure can definitely be useful. But I suppose it's often about the kind of quality of the decisions and not necessarily it's not necessarily always about the speed.
And now you're leading the Kammerphilharmonie Frankfurt.
Yes, exactly.
And what does leadership look like for you on a daily basis?
Yeah, it's very interesting. So I'm in the independent scene again. The Kammerphilharmonie Frankfurt is a chamber orchestra based in Frankfurt. Very small team, like most ensembles in the independent scene. And therefore, leadership in this context tends to be coordinating, communicating, and kind of planning for the future. And I suppose this applies to most leadership situations, but because the team is so small and because the musicians are freelance, so they also can play for various other orchestras and ensembles and have various other projects that are not kind of full-time with us, that does mean that the kind of coordinating is very much kind of in my hands and in the hands of the artistic director. And Yeah, and I suppose leadership in this kind of context often does mean looking for funding, so kind of fundraising and applying for funding for various projects, and that definitely is, I think, the kind of core of our work.
So basically, your work is, as you mentioned, finding funds, but does it also include like negotiating, pitching, trying to persuade, and all those things?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, that also plays a huge role, and yeah, so kind of booking, so kind of looking for various festivals and theatres and so on that might be interested in our programs, but also yeah, kind of networking with various other ensembles or theatres or foundations. And I think because the financial situation in the independent scene is so unstable compared to that of the state-funded theatres, it means that kind of A, networking, but B, just cooperating with various other institutions plays a huge role.
And so those were the soft skills you were talking about previously.
Yes, exactly. That plays a huge role. I mean, for the team, so kind of within the team, but then definitely when it comes to kind of communicating and working with other institutions too.
I'm just like, out of curiosity, like every single, like whether it could be like a small ensemble or like small initiative or like maybe entrepreneurs, the whole networking process is basically, it's all about like reaching out to people, but also like this cold outreach, yeah, how like maybe people in sales would define it. How do you go about that?
Yeah.
It's like such a interesting area for people from this totally musical background without any of those concerns.
Yes, I know what you mean. And yeah, we're often not prepared in that sense, because if you study music in particular, it's often very kind of focused on your instrument, on the music, and not necessarily on other very important skills too, like networking. And I mean, I think it's definitely linked to experience. So the kind of more you've worked in the field and been in the field, the bigger your network is. And I think I'm realizing more and more just how small or relatively small our world is or our field is. And therefore, the more you've kind of moved around and worked in different places and for different ensembles and institutions, the bigger your network becomes, just kind of automatically, and one thing leads to the next, as it were. So kind of experiences definitely plays an important role in that sense. And yeah, and I think kind of not being scared of reaching out, like you were saying, so kind of being proactive in that sense and getting in touch with people and trying to create some kind of a connection with other people, that plays an important role. And I suppose just kind of curiosity too, so kind of going to see various events and I don't know, trying to talk to the organisers after the event, or taking time for workshops, and in that sense, kind of trying to be part of the whole field in a proactive way. If that makes any sense, it might sound a bit vague.
No, absolutely. Do you believe in follow-ups? I mean, like follow-ups, emails, everybody usually suggests, it's like, yes, you have to reach out to people, like pitch your idea. And if you don't hear from them for a week or 2 weeks, then you have to follow up. Mm-hmm. Have you had like positive experiences from this practice?
Yes. I mean, I think you do have to, you do have to run after people to a certain extent. And I think especially if it's a first kind of connection, it takes a while to create that connection. And I think people are often just so kind of busy that, if an email or something doesn't seem like a particularly high priority, then it can quite easily just, end up kind of disappearing somewhere. And I mean, I get that too. I totally understand. And I think often, I mean, it's always a good idea to send kind of relatively short emails and suggest a phone call in the email. So kind of very long emails put people off. And I mean, I know they put me off too. And in general, I'm quite a big fan of phone calls, I have to say. And so following up, say, I mean, if you write an email and don't get a reply in the first kind of week or 10 days or whatever, then it can absolutely make sense just to try to give the person a call if you have the number, and they might not have time then and there, but it's just, yeah, if you don't know someone, it's that much more kind of personal, and it's just easier to create a connection if you're actually talking to someone.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Coming back to your leadership style, I'm curious, how did you go about building trust as a young female leader, especially in a field where age and hierarchy still carry so much weight? Although you mentioned that you are working in the independent scene, but still, it's like such a traditional setting.
Yeah. I think it was more of not a problem, but it was a kind of very present topic for me in Osnabrück compared to the last year with the Kammerphilharmonie Frankfurt, because I mean, I started working in Osnabrück when I was 25, I think. Yes, 25. And a lot of the musicians were a lot older. Some of them were kind of double my age. I think it still is. I mean, it still is, or it still can be quite a difficult topic, because however competent and however confident you are, being a young woman can still make life more difficult for you, definitely. And I think, when it comes to, like you're saying, when it comes to kind of being respected, that can play a huge role. And in Osnabrück, when I started, not with everyone, but with kind of certain musicians, I did have to be quite firm at the beginning, I think, in certain situations. And I mean, learning to kind of say no, or learning to make decisions that other people might not like, is difficult anyway. And as a young woman, if you are kind of half the age of the person you have in front of you, that does make it more complicated. But I think in general, just trying to find that confidence within you, and learning to be firm. So learning to kind of say what you think, and in a respectful and kind of polite and friendly way. But that is definitely something that I had to learn.
That's a very interesting point. Thank you for sharing this. You mentioned that now in an independent scene, ensembles tend to have this collaborative approach of decision making. And how do you balance, artistic expectations with administrative or financial limitations?
Yeah. So I work very closely with the artistic director, and I think that's always incredibly important. So in bigger institutions, in small ensembles, in all sorts of very different contexts, that balance between kind of management and art is incredibly important. And I think in the independent scene, because the financial situation is so unstable and kind of money is a huge topic in general, it just naturally, there's a kind of natural balance in some way between the kind of artistic planning and management, and you can't not develop projects and concepts together. So it's always, because based on the funding you have, based on the situation, you have to be incredibly flexible. You have to be kind of capable of adapting a concept very quickly if you don't receive funding from a particular foundation or whatever. And therefore it just kind of naturally pushes you towards, in a positive way, pushes you towards kind of creating this balance and finding this balance between the artistic side of things and the management side of things. And that's not always the case in bigger theatres. It's because the financial situation is very different. And if you do just kind of receive regular funding from the city or from the state, often it is, so the kind of artistic director is often in a kind of decision-making position. And of course, they always have to kind of talk to the orchestra manager or to the kind of management team and they have to kind of think about budgeting too. And yet I think it would be very positive if the manager and the artistic director, even in bigger theatres, if they were kind of on the same level and working together.
Have you ever had very really bad situation with fundings and money when you actually had to cancel the entire production because of that?
Not cancel the entire production, but it happens quite often that you do then have to kind of adapt a concept. And so maybe, you kind of you have a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C. And if everything goes well and all your applications for funding kind of work out, then you can go with plan A, if not plan B, and it does just require an incredible amount of flexibility and creativity too. But it's not always a bad thing, because I think if you learn how to kind of work with what you have, it does mean that you have to come up with very kind of often very interesting and creative ideas that you might not necessarily have developed if you had just been kind of if you didn't have any kind of restrictions. So it's kind of positive and negative sides.
So the silver lining,
exactly.
Well, that's reassuring and definitely a very positive point of view. Are you working on other projects as well outside the Kammerphilharmonie?
I am, yes, because so it's not a full-time position with the Kammerphilharmonie Frankfurt, and I mean a lot of ensembles in the independent scene don't have a fixed team, and the musicians and the kind of artistic director, they just kind of have to work on the projects and do the kind of organisation and planning, often on a either not paid, or on a kind of volunteer base. That's often the case. But so we're lucky that we do have funding for my position, but it's not a full-time position, and I'm kind of active in the independence with other ensembles. I've started working recently with the one-to-one concerts, and I'm really enjoying the work with the team there too. And I'm kind of doing production management for a few other ensembles like the Stegreif Orchestra, where I did my internship during my studies.
Well, congratulations. You seem quite busy.
It's great in some ways, but it doesn't. I have to be careful about kind of coordinating the various projects. That's definitely challenging sometimes.
Well, I can only imagine. Is there a skill you never expected to need in your job, but now couldn't do without?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a very good question. I'm not sure. I think, a bit like we were saying before, we often kind of think about the various hard skills and all the kind of facts you need to know. And we often, it's not that we forget about the soft skills, but I think, the more I go forward and the more I realize that soft skills play such an important role. And I think, I suppose it's not a skill, it's more of a kind of combination, but that the combination between kind of being, so kind of empathy and kind of understanding the person that you're working with and the person that's kind of in front of you, and yet at the same time being able to kind of be firm and say no when you have to. And it's that kind of balance that I often find is really, really important.
Oh, yeah, true. And, I was wondering, do you see yourself staying in orchestra leadership for the long term? Or is this like one chapter of a broader vision for your career?
I think I do want to stay in this field, and of course you never know. Life is full of surprises, but definitely this kind of field. I mean, I'm very interested in artistic planning too, and I really enjoy working very closely with the artistic director now of the Kammerphilharmonie Frankfurt. So I think I might not necessarily stay in the management field. I could then kind of switch to the artistic planning side of things too at some point, or ideally a combination. But I definitely do kind of want to carry on with what I've started in the last years.
So definitely the orchestra environment.
Yes, orchestra environment or music environment, music field in general, I'd say.
And from the perspective of a young female leader, do you think leadership opportunities for women, especially so young, in the arts are evolving, or is progress still slower than we really would like to believe?
I think it's still too slow. And things are, that's very blunt, I know, but I think things are improving in some ways, and of course have improved immensely in the last 60, 70 years. But at the same time, every now and again, I think not only in our field, but in general, when it comes to various incredibly important topics for the kind of feminist movement, I often think that it's a bit like a kind of a present with wrapping, and we've definitely changed the wrapping. So from the kind of from outside, things look like they've changed enormously. But if you kind of take off the wrapping and actually look at the kind of what's inside, so the actual present, it's often surprising to kind of see how many things haven't changed or are changing too slowly. And yeah, I think there's still a long way to go, definitely.
What would you say, like, even like compared to like 5 years ago or like 10 years ago? I mean, things have improved.
Definitely, yeah, and I think there are more and more women in important positions. I think pay gap still a major issue,
Yes.
and yeah, and I think the kind of higher up the position and the bigger the institution, the smaller the percentage of women in leadership positions, and
Definitely.
yeah, that is changing, of course, but it's a slow process.
Yes, I hope that our generation is gonna actually witness this improvement.
I know, so do I. Yes, we've all got to kind of work in that direction, definitely.
But on a positive note, when you look at the future of the performing arts, especially in classical music, what gives you hope?
I think art always has and always will play an important role in our societies. And I think art and music, they do have a very kind of strong social aspect too. I mean, of course, art can just be art, so l'art pour l'art, and but it often does have another dimension and can, yeah, has an incredible potential too, I think, in that sense. And yeah, in a health society in the future, in a healthy, sustainable society, I think that art has to play an important role. And yeah, maybe the scene as we know it now might change radically, probably will change radically. Funding will become kind of more and more of an issue in the next years, definitely anyway. But I think just the kind of creative potential means that however difficult the situation gets, or even if we do have to kind of change things radically, there always seem to be kind of amazing people with clever ideas that do just have potential for the future.
You know, talking about the future, like I cannot not think about AI. And what would you say about this whole AI development? And do you think that there might be like potential or maybe potential threat to the classical music industry?
I think both. So potential and potentially a threat too. Potential, because I think, I mean, it is important to kind of to kind of experiment with and try to work out what kind of tools there might be that we can apply to our work and what we do, and you know, creative concepts too that can be developed with or kind of using AI, and at the same time live performance. I mean, there's all sorts of kind of interesting things popping up already. And threat, yes, I think not. I see more for kind of other sectors like the kind of film sector, and maybe for writers too, and for other artistic sectors. I think in some ways, live performance, yeah, it can't really be taken away. And I think the more we live in a virtual world, the more people are kind of looking for that live experience, that kind of feeling you have when you're in a live performance. And part of that is all being in one place together, and all the kind of togetherness that you perceive during a live performance. And I don't think AI is a threat for that.
That's definitely a positive note, and I totally agree with you, especially on the fact that we are so focused on this like virtual setting and just being outside with other people, like enjoying the music. It's just such a gift.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, this podcast has a very strong mission to spread the real practice knowledge of this challenging industry for all my fellow aspiring arts managers. So my question to you is, what do you wish someone had told you about the industry before starting out in arts management? And what you would say to somebody who is just starting out?
Again, this might sound blunt, but I wish someone had told me that the pay is so bad. Because I think, it's great for parents to tell their kids, to tell their children to follow their dreams and do what they love doing. And I totally stand behind that and believe that's really important. But at the same time, kind of being practical and pragmatic can be important too. And I think there is an issue for all of us in the arts field that, even if you are in a kind of leadership position or just in general, if you compare similar positions or similar roles in other fields, whether it's marketing or law or medicine or whatever, kind of similar positions are often paid a lot better in other fields. And I think that's important to know when you start off. And a lot of people would, of course, decide to do art anyway. And I think I would decide to do what I'm doing anyway. But just that awareness is often not there, I think.
No, I can totally relate. And like on every single level, yes, like performers, teachers, managers, yes, it's just a very underfunded sector.
Yeah.
But here we are. Yes. And Rose, my last question would be, what qualities do you think the next generation of arts leaders will need most?
I think critical thinking and flexibility, and not only for us in our little music bubble, but in general, I think, not going along with things as they are and as they've always been, but really being able to think about things critically and form opinions of your own and try to kind of work out, not alone, but with your team, with the people you work with, try to work out the best way to go forwards. And so in that sense, critical thinking and flexibility.
Amen. Rose, thank you very much for this valuable conversation. It was truly inspiring and very, very educational.
Thank you so much too. And thank you for the invitation.
You are welcome. Thank you for accepting it. You have listened to The Art She Manages. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow the show and leave a positive review on whichever platform you're listening. It really helps more people discover these stories. Feel free to share the episode with someone you think would be inspired by it. Until next time!